Welcome back to How to Craft Fair. This is episode number 9 in the How to Become a Craft Fair Vendor series. And today we're going to be talking about what kind of items you should be bringing to your next craft fair. So, bringing the right kind of inventory is one of the most important things that you can do to set yourself up for success at a craft fair. So, we're going to talk about what you should bring and how much to ensure that you sell as much as possible at your next event. This is going to be different from the previous video I did in this series, the craft fair checklist, where that revolved around displays, setup materials, things like that. In this video, we're going to be talking about the actual items that you'll be selling at the craft fair. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so the first thing that you can do to help identify which items you should be bringing to the fair is to consider the event demographic. Now, when you register and sign up for a craft fair, what you want to do is have an idea of the audience that attends those fairs. Are they mostly female, male, young, older? Is it in the city? Is it in the country? These are the kind of things that you want to know ahead of time because you can use this information to decide what types of items you should bring to the show. Like I said, you want to just be as prepared and familiar with the event as possible, and as early as you can as well, so that you can not only bring inventory, but as you make inventory and you create it, you can kind of create it with this audience in mind. So this is the first tip in trying to figure out what types of items you should bring to a craft fair. Okay, now the second tip that I have is to research your past sales. Now, all of you, if you have done at least a few art and craft shows, you should have a good idea of which items are your best sellers and then which items tend to kind of struggle. You want to recall your past events leading up to this show to figure out, what's hot, what's trending, things that are kind of going in the right direction for you. And you want to start to kind of think about your booth and how much space at your booth you're going to dedicate to certain items. So I always recommend people to not spread themselves too thin at their booth and, not to have like 30 different types of items. I would stick with maybe like 5 to 10 different designs or different types of items and use prominent parts of your booth, maybe like the part of your booth that's going to be facing the most event traffic, to feature your best sellers. Okay, so you want to use that best part of your booth to feature those hot items that are most likely to sell. And then as you kind of like, as your booth tapers off, or maybe you have like a couple sides to your booth where the only way that people can see those items are if they're actually in it, that's when you can kind of fill your booth in with, the items that maybe don't sell quite as well. But you basically want to have like your heavy hitters out facing the crowd. Another thing to keep in consideration is to bring an appropriate percentage of stock based on items that sell better or worse. Okay, so if you've identified maybe 2 or 3 items that sell really well, I would bring more of that inventory to the show, and then of course a little bit less of the stuff that doesn't sell quite as well. Basically, you want to be prepared to sell as much as possible of anything at your booth, but if you can use past information of what's been selling, that can determine, how much of which type of item to bring. Okay, and the third tip I have for this is to bring items that's going to cover all price points. So you want to make sure that your booth has low, medium, and high priced items. And you want to try to basically have a balanced inventory that ensures that you have something to offer a shopper with any kind of budget. So shoppers that have a smaller budget, shoppers that are, willing to spend more, you basically want to be prepared to have all of those situations covered. Now, what I want you to remember is that when you're crafting these items, I still want you to, craft them with a purpose. You know what I mean? So don't just make items Like, don't make cheap items just to have inexpensive items, or don't make something super expensive just to have a really high priced, high ticket item. Like, you should still be creating from your heart. But as you create items, just kind of think about, hitting those different price points so that when you present your booth, there's something for everybody, at all different kinds of price levels. Okay, and another question that I get from vendors a lot of times is how much stock to bring in general. A lot of vendors, especially when they're starting out, they really don't know like how much inventory to bring to an event. And there's a few different elements to kind of consider here. So we'll kind of break it apart into a couple different segments. So the first thing that I'll talk about is restocking your booth as the day goes on. So ideally, if you're having a good show, you're making some sales and things like that. In the morning, when you load up your car with all your inventory, you don't want to bring like just enough to fill the booth that morning, because as the day goes on and you start having sales, your booth is going to, kind of get picked apart, and all of a sudden there's going to be like gaps in your table and gaps in your booth where there was items at the beginning of the day, and then by the time the day is like halfway over, then your booth looks really spotty. You don't want that. So you want to bring more inventory basically than you think that you'll need, so that as the day is progressing and people are buying things, you can replace those items at the booth immediately and keep it looking full from the start of the day all the way until the end of the day. All right, so that's kind of like the first thing to consider with how much inventory to bring. If you want to get a little bit more specific with it, there's always the 2% conversion rate trick. And I've featured this in a different video, so I'll kind of tag it up. Okay, we'll put it right here. Okay, so it's basically a trick to get a rough estimate on a couple of different things. One is the number of sales that you'll have during a craft show. And then the other element that you can kind of figure out is the total sales amount, like dollar amount, that you'll have at an event. And the way that you calculate this is all based around the expected attendance of a show. Okay. So in order to even do this, you would have to get some kind of information from the organizer, like an estimate of the expected attendance for this event. If you can get that information, you can use this conversion rate trick. So basically the way it works is a craft fair has an average conversion rate of 2%. And what that means is if there's 100 people that come through the door, that means that your booth is going to get sales from 2 of those people on average. Okay. Now that average can vary depending on, how good your booth looks and how good your items look. If your pricing is reasonable, there's a lot of factors that come into play. You know what I mean? So it's not like it's a hard 2% for everybody, so you might be on the higher end of that if you've got your stuff together, we'll say, and you might be on the lower end of that if you're just kind of getting starting out and you don't really have like your feet underneath you yet. Okay, so now let's kind of increase the stakes a little bit and say the expected attendance is going to be 1,000 people. Now 2% of 1,000 is 20 sales. So find out from the organizer what the attendance is going to be. And if the attendance is going to be like 1,000 people and you have 20 transactions, are you going to be able to stock your booth through those 20 transactions? And as the attendance gets higher, that's where it gets a little bit more progressively difficult to keep your booth stocked and have that prepared inventory on hand to handle like these larger crowds. Just for example, if the show gets up to 5,000 attendees, now we're talking 100 sales, 100 transactions. So it's like, will you be able to handle that kind of inventory? So that's just, something to consider with how much stock to bring at an event is you can use that 2% conversion rate as a rough estimate on how much you'll go through during the day. Okay, and finally, the last thing that I'm going to talk about, last tip, is the theme of your booth. Okay, so Ideally, you should have some established theme at your booth. Now, there's different types of vendors that make different things, so there's woodworkers, soap people, candle makers, jewelry. There's all different types of artisans and booths, right? But basically, you want to have like a theme and a realm at your booth that you pretty much don't stray outside of, because once you start to spread yourself too thin and you start putting all your ideas out there, your booth doesn't really have like an identity anymore. And you always want to have a theme and identity established at your booth so that when somebody visits it, they kind of know like, okay, this is like all soaps or this is all jewelry. And it just kind of establishes a little bit of credibility in you as a maker as well, because you know they don't see somebody that's basically putting 100 different items out there and then just hoping that something works out. So there's a few reasons why you want to establish a theme. But anyways, the inventory that you should bring, think about your theme. So think about not only just from a sales perspective about what's selling and what's hot, create things that you have a passion for and where your heart is, because if your booth starts to catch on and people start to, recognize you and start shopping from you, like they're going to kind of have like an expectation that, okay, this is like the great woodworker that I like, or this is the great jewelry person that I like. And if you start kind of just really throwing, curveballs at your booth, you're going to throw people for a loop, and you might, lose some customers by doing this. So as far as what type of inventory to bring, I would just suggest, stay in your theme and hit your theme really hard and basically just sell out for it. Just become that theme and really, really go for it. Dig your heels in. But that's basically it. I don't want to go into, too detailed of suggestions for what type of inventory to bring or things like that. And I know that this is kind of a concern for vendors, especially when they're first starting out, is like, okay, what do I bring to a show? What's going to sell? Things like that. What I would say basically is just create from your heart, bring it to the show, and, present it the best way that you can. Be excited to talk about it when people ask you questions about it, and be friendly, be engaging, and things like that. But like I said, just bring things that meant something to you when you created it, because that is something that you're going to have like the most connection to, the most confidence in talking about with people. So I would suggest and recommend that for newer vendors. Veterans, you kind of already know this, so really it's just about honing in how much to bring and how much stock to prepare before the event. How much do you have to make before the event begins? And then also think about your best sellers. So like I said, with your booth, don't dedicate like 50% of your booth to items that don't really sell well. That just doesn't make sense. You only have so much square footage to work with at these events. So, maybe dedicate like 75 or 80% of your booth towards your best sellers. And then maybe like 20 to 25% of your booth can be for your other items that maybe it's like a newer design or something you're kind of mixing in. But you always want to dedicate a good portion of your booth towards what will sell well. So I hope this video has helped you out to, decide what to and how much to bring at an event. Again, this is episode number 9 in the How to Become a Craft Fair Vendor series. And if you want to check out the entire playlist, click this link above. And thank you all so much for watching.